What's up, guys? Don't mind some of my dogs sitting over there. Up to three now, in case you don't know. We have Phoebe, who was here first. Then we got Janka, and now Zeus. Zeus and Janka are German Shepherds. Phoebe is a German Shepherd Border Collie mix. So they're outside, doing their thing. What this video is going to be about today, just going to be a quick video on some of the things that make blood and short-tailed pythons unique. And these are things that someone new to keeping them should probably know before they get them. I can't tell you how many times we're in some of the social media groups or different things and seeing people ask questions like, oh, I haven't seen my blood poop since I got it in a month or two, and I'm worried something is wrong, or asking questions about things that had they done a little research up front or had content like this to be aware of, they wouldn't be asking these questions all the time. So let's dive into the first one. And we might as well just talk about the stool retention. There is a video on my channel earlier covering why it is believed that blood and short-tailed pythons do hold their stool longer than most snakes, but they do. And they don't always do that. Mine seem to go fairly regularly, especially with passing liquid. Mine pass liquid very frequently, probably 1 to 2 times a week on average. But as far as stool goes and actually going to the bathroom or pooping, it can vary within my collection to very young animals that'll pass weekly to adults that may only go every 3 or 4 months. And in both cases, it can be very normal. Typically, you will get concerned before you should be concerned. But if you ever get to a point where you're really worried, you can always feel near the snake's vent and kind of look and see and feel if there's like a urate or something stuck in there that might be turned an awkward way where the animal can't pass it on their own. A lot of times these guys will wait till a shed cycle to do that. So be mindful of that. And if they get to a point where they're holding on to way too much and you do have any concern, stop feeding or slow down feeding or smaller meals, or do whatever you can to offset how much you're pumping into the animal. Do a little more handling than usual, perhaps, if the animal's comfortable with that. If you have the ability to take them outside into a safe environment, you can do something like that. Just get them a little more active, start moving that stuff through, soak them in an appropriate temperatured soak. And all of these subjects have been covered on the channel, so I'm not going to get into depth with them. But just be aware that it is within the realm of normal for these animals to hold their stool longer than you would probably anticipate or expect. The second thing I'd like to talk about, which is also something that you commonly see people bring up, is, oh, my blood python is very, very defensive. I was told it wasn't defensive before, and now it's defensive here. Now, there's a myriad of reasons, and once again, there's a video we did on this. But blood pythons and short-tailed pythons are very temperature-sensitive snakes. And probably 7 out of 10 times that somebody reaches out with a defensive animal, a simple backing down of the temperature usually solves it. So these animals probably do their best health-wise and living-wise in an ambient temperature that ranges somewhere from like 78 to 82 degrees. That's like really their sweet spot where I find they do really, really well. If you're offering them a hot spot, make sure, A, that they have options to go to their hot or cool parts of their cage and still feel secure, that they have access to water from both points. But basically, when I run hot spots, I'll run like 84, maybe 85 degrees. The biggest thing, especially with babies, you have to be careful because you're not really giving them enough space typically to get off the heat. So you don't want to go too high on that hot spot because it will affect their temperament and ultimately can affect their health, because if they're stressed out for longer periods of time, makes them more vulnerable to illness, disease issue, all those things. So definitely keep in mind these guys can be very, very temperature sensitive, and try your best to keep the parameters within the range of where they're comfortable. And that may vary slightly from animal to animal. But like I said, that 78 to 82 range, if you're fluctuating from your warmer end to your cooler end with that ambient, and then giving them a hot spot of like 83, 84, 85 for non-gravid animals, if they do want to bask a little after a meal or for whatever, that tends to work really, really well and keep them healthy and balanced mentally. The next thing I would say is probably the single most important aspect of husbandry, and we've talked about this, is ventilation. Everybody focuses so much on temperature and humidity, and those things are important, but ventilation is probably the single most important factor in the overall health of these animals. So they do well in probably a larger range of humidity than most people realize, but the more humid it is, the more ventilation you have, the better off you're going to be, especially when these animals do let go and go to the bathroom. Ventilation is going to be your friend to keep them safe and healthy. They need to be able to get out of those fumes and get away from that stuff, because if they're constantly breathing it in through their very deep lung and their respiratory system, it actually can adversely affect their health. And so you don't want to do that. Obviously, you don't want a sick snake to begin with, but you definitely don't want a sick snake simply because you didn't offer enough ventilation. And you do want to balance it. You want to have that ventilation, but be able to maintain humidity. But prioritize the ventilation end of things, and then figure out how to make your humidity work while still being ventilated, more than restricting ventilation to increase humidity. You see people that keep these animals in an enclosure that's really not proper, like say a fish tank with a screen top, and they'll tell you, oh, just throw a towel over most of the top and whatever, and then you have no ventilation. And that's very, very dangerous for these animals, especially as they get some size. Not recommended. So adjust your humidity to meet the needs of the ventilation, as opposed to the other way around would be my recommendation for the best success with them. So another thing that's kind of unique with Bloods and short-tailed pythons is their first shed cycle. Another thing I know I've mentioned many times, but another thing that I can't tell you how many people, even people that are breeding these snakes and are anticipating their first clutch, don't know. It's very common for me to come across people asking like, oh, should I wait until they shed to offer them first meals? And my response is they'll be dead long before that, because they will. So most python species and a lot of other snake species and things like that typically shed either right at birth or up to their first week or two of being alive. And now with the yolk that they absorb, baby snakes are designed to be able to go a little period of time without eating from the beginning. And normally you want to wait till their yolk is absorbed and let them kind of settle in before you even offer food anyways. But with blood and short-tailed pythons, most of them aren't going to experience their first shed cycle until 3 to 6 months, with like 3 to 4 and change being like probably the most common window. And obviously it depends on the animal, the food, how much food you're throwing at them, how big the meals, these things. There's factors that can affect that timeline and move it a little bit, maybe a little sooner than 3 months, maybe a little bit later than 5 months. But by and large, if you were to wait to feed them until after those first sheds, they would never go through their first shed. Those meals kind of help move them into that, as well as starting to make them grow, develop, color up, and all those things. So generally speaking, as far as offering food, if you wait like 2 weeks, that's a safe amount of time where you've let them absorb their yolk and they should be hungry and it's early enough. Sometimes they'll eat within a week. Sometimes people will wait 3 weeks. Anywhere in that window to start offering meals is pretty safe and satisfactory. So just keep that in mind. Don't wait for those first sheds to feed. And also understand those first sheds aren't going to come. After the first one, they start to go through a more traditional cycle of shedding, where babies shed more often, and the older they get, the less and less they shed as their growth rate starts to slow down. And the last thing is pushing the realm of unique, because it's patience. But I do think that patience is such a critical thing with these snakes, because their metabolism's slower. Sometimes they can be a little slower to settle into change and new environments. They really will test you, waiting for that first shed or those shed cycles, waiting for eggs to hatch. Whatever it is that you're doing, patience is going to be a virtue. And that sounds cliche, I know, but it really, really is with these animals. It's very, very important in keeping them safe and healthy, and tempering your expectations and being able to balance their mental well-being. If you're trying to rush them through everything, it's just not the right kind of vibe and environment for these snakes. They're very, very slow, methodical. Everything has a purpose. And so you want to be mindful of that and kind of keep yourself in check with these animals in order to have success with them. So what I would love from you guys is to jump down in the comments below and tell me some other unique things that you've learned about keeping bloods and short tails over time, or maybe a species of snake you keep that has some unique feature that maybe I don't know about, or maybe the average person scrolling through this doesn't know about. And then make sure that you're hitting that like button if you enjoyed the video. Like I said, we're going to be trying to get some more content out there and things. So hopefully we can do that consistently. Thank you guys so much, and we'll see you soon.